of Michigan businesswomen and a Ross MBA student. On behalf of the Ross School, it is my pleasure to welcome you tonight to our Handelman Lecture featuring Dean Alison Davis-Blake and special guest Sallie Krawcheck. Ms. Krawcheck is currently the chair of Ellevate Network, a global professional network for thousands of women across numerous industries worldwide. Ellevate Asset Management participated with Pax World on the Pax Ellevate Global Women's Index Fund, the first and only mutual fund of its kind that invests in the top 400 top-rated companies in the world for advancing women. Before becoming an entrepreneur, she had a storied career on Wall Street in financial services. She was past president of Bank of America's Global Wealth and Investment Management, the largest wealth management business in the world with $2.2 trillion in client balances. Prior to joining Bank of America, Ms. Krawcheck was chairman and CEO of Sanford C. Bernstein & Company. In 2002, she joined Citi as chairman and CEO of Smith Barney, overseeing the global management of the Smith Barney and Citi investment research business, and in 2004 was appointed CFO for Citigroup. She was later appointed CEO and chairman for Citi Global Wealth Management. A graduate of University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and Columbia University, during her career, Ms. Krawcheck has received many accolades, including being named to Fast Company's 2014's 100 Most Creative People list, one of the top 10 up-and-coming leaders to watch by Entrepreneur Magazine, the Last Honest Analyst, one of Forbes and Fortune's Most Powerful Women in Business, and recipient of CNBC's Business Leader of the Future Award. There is much more I could say, but I all know you want to get to the main event, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dean Davis-Blake and Sallie Krawcheck to the stage.
Sallie, thank you so much for being with us today. I think it would be most helpful to the students here if you gave us some personal insights based on your own career. You've had a fascinating career path from Wall Street to financial services to entrepreneurships with some really dramatic public ups and downs, as we'll talk about. But let's talk about the beginning. You were a journalism major back at the University of North Carolina, but your first job was on Wall Street. Why did you go to Wall Street?
For the money.
For the money. And that was the beginning, middle, and end.
Well, I was a journalism major. It was the 1980s. Wall Street was pretty hot. I didn't have any money, like literally no money. And so what I told myself, which I think was kind of sort of the truth, was that I was going to go to Wall Street to learn about something so that I could then write about it, as opposed to, here I am, let me write obituaries for you. But I'm not sure it was love at first sight because I hated my jobs in my 20s, but it did lead down a career path that I just thought was extraordinary and I wouldn't otherwise have had.
So you hated your jobs in your 20s, but I think when we talked on the phone, you said 29 years and 11 months. Just before the big 30, you figured it out, what you wanted to do. What happened?
Yeah. So I'll tell all of you who are in your 20s, I mean, honestly, if you don't have it figured out, I did not. So I took an investment banking job. I went to business school in order to get away from that investment banking job. I had a summer internship at Time Magazine where I did not get an offer to go on. I had a great job at Disney that was offered to me coming out of school that I desperately wanted, but my husband did not want to move out to California, so I didn't take it. I went right back into investment banking. About 2 weeks before I started at my new investment banking job for him, I found out he was having an affair with a friend of mine. On my first day of work, I vomited my way through work. I did that job for about a year. We got divorced, continue on, remarried, pregnant, and all this stuff happened in my 20s. And I remember at 29 years and 11 months with the view that I cannot believe I went to undergraduate on a scholarship. Got an advanced business degree, and I'm an unemployed stay-at-home mom. I have ruined my life. But wasn't giving up and kept writing down what did I like about investment banking, what did I like about my time at Time, what did I like about business school, what do I like, what am I good at, what am I not good at, And I was standing in my kitchen one day eating a pear, and I don't know if this happens to any of you, But the world shook. And I knew I was about to have a great idea. And that great idea was that I had to be a sell-side equity research analyst. That was what I wanted to do. And from then on, it was a matter of executing, which was not easy because I was a stay-at-home mom with an infant. I got rejected from Morgan Stanley because they found out I had a baby. I got rejected from Smith Barney, where I later fired the guy who rejected me when he worked for me. You're welcome. I got rejected from Merrill Lynch, ditto, right? I got rejected by Lehman Brothers 3 times, rejected by Bear Stearns, UBS, Dane Rauscher, Raymond James, Dillon Reed, Goldman Sachs, you name it, except one firm, Sanford Bernstein, would give me a job. And by the way, I was a #1 ranked analyst just a handful of years later. So when I finally found it, it clicked.
Although it took a while for the industry to find you, but you found your way in.
At the time I found the right firm. Mm-hmm. Found the right firm, the right job, and I really had figured out what that fit was. I don't know about y'all, I love Excel spreadsheets. I mean, I start working on one of those puppies, and 8 hours later, my husband said, "Did you remember to eat?" I love those things. I really like writing. I really like engaging with smart people, and I really liked the personal responsibility. Those were the things that for me, and I liked the metrics of it. Did the stock that I said would go down or not? Was I right or was I wrong? And those things for me, maybe not for you, but for me, all made sense. So it fit, finally.
So expanding from your experience, I think we talked about on the phone, we both have children in college. We're going to soon figure out that first full-time job. A lot of our students here are figuring out the full-time job or an MBA career transition. What advice would you give people here for navigating that first job or first career transition?
So I don't know what the statistics are here, but I will tell you that when I graduated from business school, they told us that the majority of us would not last in that first job more than a year. So that more than half of us would make a mistake with that first job. And I was gone within a year, so I was one of the statistics. And so I think my advice to you is do your best to find that dream job, but it's going to take several attempts. And the one thing I think that's thing I think that's so great about business school is it really enables you to try on so many different hats, right? You take I took the marketing class and I'm like, wow, super glad I took that. That's not me, right? You take the leadership class, golly, that's really what I like. And so that learning process continues. And so I would say play it loose. Right? Recognize that you're on a journey and you're learning, and that continues because P.S., I'm 50, I'm a new entrepreneur. So when I figured it out at the age of 29 years and 11 months, I didn't figure it out for forever. I figured it out for the next 10 years. And I think it's important to recognize that business changes faster than it ever was when I was your age, and you change. And so you have to stay open to understanding what motivates you and understanding really, very importantly, what your personal mission is and what you want it to be.
So when you finally found out what it was, you were, I think it's been documented, spectacularly successful. You were, as you said, ranked first in your field by Institutional Investor, I think the youngest person ever to be so ranked. You were spectacularly successful at Citi, at Smith Barney. How did you handle that spectacular success after sort of the weaving before that?
I worked my tail off. I mean, it's funny you say that. I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. I remember seeing a sign, which is if you're successful and you're not enjoying it, you're not successful. But, I never sat back and said, boy, I did it. Didn't I do it? I mean, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed every minute of it. But there was never a now I can rest on my laurels. Because, and I'm sure we'll get there, in addition to having some success, very public success, I've had some very public failures. And I think part of staying sane through all of this is recognizing that these are not end points. These are points along the journey, and things change. And that that failure today will be a success tomorrow as long as you keep learning from it. And you take in the facts. You almost sort of analyze yourself as though you're a third party. and taking the facts about what's working for you and what wasn't. But it was fun. It was much more fun being successful than not successful.
So maybe let's talk about the not fun part. I think very publicly, despite this very amazing success, you've been publicly fired twice. Twice. Yeah, not once, but twice.
It was so fun, I did it again.
Yeah. So that is an experience few have had, to have such a public firing twice. What lesson did you take away from that?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you a little bit. So there are two very different stories with the firings, and let me tell them to you. And the reason I want to take a minute with it is because we really don't, in this country, particularly on this side of the country, talk enough about failures and what they're like. So the first time I got fired, and some of you just heard this before, the first time I got fired, I was at Citigroup. I was running Smith Barney in the private bank. I had a new boss. Vikram Pandit had come in as CEO of Citi. We did not hit it off immediately. I remember sort of thinking, I don't think he likes me very much, but so what, right? We're business people, we're working. By the way, don't tweet that. We don't need that tweeted. But we were in the crisis of 2007 and into 2008. And at Smith Barney, we had sold products to investors that we firmly believed were low risk, that were supposed to, in a bad market, go down about 8 cents on the dollar. We had a terrible market, and they went down about 100 cents on the dollar. Some went down 98 cents on the dollar, but 9,800 cents on the dollar. I tore through this and looked for who was the evildoer who had decided to sell these terribly risky products as low risk. There were no evildoers. There were some dumb people, or there were some smart people who made some dumb mistakes. But what I found is we just made a mistake. And so I looked at this. We made this terrible mistake. Big print says low risk. Small print says you can lose all your money. And I went to the CEO and said, look, I know this is unconventional, but we've made a terrible mistake. We have two choices here. We can either tell the clients tough luck, and it's gonna be bad. They're gonna hate us. They're not like clients, Vikram, that you're used to dealing with on the institutional side, who will sue you on the one hand and do business with you on the other. They will sue us. They will leave. Their financial advisor will leave with them. We'll be in the press. We're going to be in court for years. And by the way, we've done wrong. We should partially reimburse them. I know it's unconventional, but it'll be the best thing for the client relationship. It'll make us good people, and it'll be actually a net present value positive versus what's going to happen over time. He said no. I said yes. I did all kinds of analyses, went back again. He said no. It actually got to the point where he wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't take a meeting with me. The board found out about it because some of them had invested in the products, called us up to debate it in front of them, and we did. Now, I remember having this talk because I was having this great life. What a great life, right? I had this great job. I knew my job. I had a corporate jet. I had the biggest office you've ever seen in your life. I had warm cookies that were delivered every day at 3. I had 2 assistants. I was making gobs. it was fantastic. It's fantastic. And I remember thinking, if I take one more step, the best case is I get fired and we partially reimburse clients. The other case is I get fired and we don't. Do you take the step? Warm, and they were chocolate cookies with the bits of chocolate in them, so when you open them, they goo. Oh, it was fantastic. So I did it. And the board sided with me. We partially reimbursed clients, and I lost my job. All over the paper. Okay, so that's firing number 1. Firing number 2. I'm running Merrill Lynch. I was brought in by Ken Lewis after Bank of America bought Merrill Lynch. Ken called me. He said, we're losing financial advisors hand over fist. The business is deteriorating. I called Sandy Weil. He told me you could turn this around. I went in. He said, this place is hard. This is a hard place. I'm going to be here for 2 years for you to transition you in. And my head of HR is going to be here for another 2 years. It's 4 years, okay? I said, great, fantastic. Ken announced his retirement less than 2 months later. And so there I was without a mentor or a sponsor or anybody. And boy, I knew I was in trouble when he announced his retirement and nobody called me. Nobody called to check on me, to see if I was okay. Well, fast forward, I went to the CEO, said, I'm happy to step down. You didn't choose me. He said, no, stay. We need you to turn around the business. 2 years later, almost to the day, when the business is 13.5% ahead of plan, growing and gaining share. I was reorganized out with a couple other people, right? So those are two very different circumstances, and you can take what lessons you want to take, right? The lesson I take from the first one is sometimes you have to do what you think is the right thing. By the way, Vikram thinks he did the right thing too. I'm not saying I was right and he was wrong. We were just different. Sometimes you got to be willing to step up, because my stomach hurt so badly, I had to step up. And the other, sometimes you're running a great business. If you don't have a mentor or a sponsor or someone arguing for you, you can lose your job. Because I assure you, I called every board member after I lost my job at Bank of America, asked them what I could have done better, and they said there was nobody in that room arguing for you. So two big lessons.
And how did you bounce back from those events?
First, you get drunk. Mm-hmm. And then second, you get drunk.
And third?
And third, well, sometimes you drink a little bit more. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. It's perspective. About a week after the thing had happened at Bank of America, I called my friend Moira Forbes, and we had breakfast. And I remember sitting in her office, and she essentially said to me, "You're leaving, right? I mean, this is too, lady. You're going to head back to South Carolina. I mean, why would you do this to yourself again?" And I remember looking at her and saying, "Why? I haven't done anything wrong. I mean, this happens. I'm going to figure this out and get back." And in fact, what I really saw was, I started to write this recently. I thought to myself, what is the lesson? What's the lesson? And if you believe in karma, what was karma telling me? Because the truth is, I loved my job at Smith Barney. I liked my job at Merrill. So why'd you love one and like the other? And it wasn't these people were nicer. They were great people at Smith Barney and Merrill. The difference was I was turning around a business and learning at Smith Barney, and I was turning around a business at Merrill. And so it was almost as though karma hit me upside the head and said, those jobs, you just kept doing the same thing. Go do something different, right? So it was almost this sort of, boom, go off and do something different. So to me, there were sort of messages in what happened. And if you take it as that as opposed to, oh my gosh, I failed, I'm so embarrassed, but what's the message? What have I now been given the opportunity to do? Because, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't very happy at Bank of America. The guy who brought me in wasn't there. I could never have quit, though. You can't quit when you have 35,000 people working for you and depending on you. And so this was sort of, if you look at it as an opportunity as opposed to a failure. And the other thing is, what's your underpinning, right? We've got food on the table. We've got amazing things we're able to accomplish during the day. We have the luxury of being able to choose what we do during our day. And when you recognize that you're at this level, that my worst day is better than 99% of other people's best day, only because of an accident of fate, right? That I happened to be married to my parents, who happened to decide to go into debt to send me to all these great schools, that what I am doing is a privilege. So all of a sudden it becomes not poor me, I was fired on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, but hot damn, I'm on the front page of the friggin' Wall Street Journal. Score, now what?
So let's talk about the now what. As you said, you transitioned into being an entrepreneur at 50, which is later than most entrepreneurs. How and why did that happen? How is it going now?
Yeah, a few things. So I announced, and this is the first time I'm talking about it publicly, I bought the Ellevate Network, the old 85 Broads. I've got a mutual fund. I am so excited about my new initiative. I announced on Monday we've raised $10 million Series A funding for a business called Ellevest. Ellevest will be a digital investment platform focused on women. Now, I got to tell you, up until about a year ago, I fought the idea that there should be an investment platform focused on women. How many mutual funds are there, right? What are we going to do? Put a pink bow on it and all that stuff? And, I'm like, and it's a little bit of where the orientation of business sometimes is, the old pink it and shrink it. But as I began to think of, sort of have some insights, they compelled me to do something about it. The insight I had was one day, I was putting on my mascara, which is where all insights generally occur, either eating a pear or putting on mascara. I was putting on my mascara, and I had this blinding insight, which is the retirement savings crisis in this country, which is so big and so ugly, at least $13 trillion in size if Social Security is solvent, which it's not, right? It's so big and so ugly, we no longer talk about it. We no longer talk about it because all the solutions are too awful to think about. Big wealth transfer, big tax increase, right? So we don't talk about it. Or cut entitlements, right? Those are the ones. It struck me that the retirement savings crisis is a gender crisis. Why? We women retire today with 2/3 the money of men. We women live 6 to 8 years longer than men. 80% of men die married, 80% of women die single. If there's a retirement savings crisis, gentlemen, you will be dead. We will be alive. Okay? Now, what happens when you recast this? When you recast this, the solutions all shift. And the solutions become keeping women in the workforce, closing the gender pay gap. If we close the gender pay gap, we reduce the retirement savings gap by 1/3. Okay? Having a paid, mandated parental leave. Many of you in the room will know only us, the United States of America, and Papua New Guinea do not have a mandated parental leave. But if you have a mandated parental leave, you keep women in the workforce. And the other thing is we have a gender investing gap. A gender investing gap, which is that we women have got plenty of money. We control $5 trillion, control, okay? But the majority of our money sits in the bank. And that's the other aha insight, which is that Wall Street is not serving women well, right? As I like to say, Wall Street is not meeting women where they are. So I had this insight, and I'm like, I know exactly what to do. I know exactly what to do. So I called up some of my big, important CEO financial services friends, and I went and met with one of them. Met with a few of them, but one in particular, I remember having breakfast. And I laid out for him, women have got all this money, we control $5 trillion, 90% of us control all of our money at some point in our lives, blah, 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 we don't invest as much. There's got to be an opportunity here. Doing it the way we've always done it isn't the way to do it. And this gentleman turned to me, he's a friend of mine, and he said, that is so interesting, Sallie. But don't their husbands manage their money for them? I'm like, oh my God. You know, not only is that, and he's like, he's not 75 years old, okay? He's a youngish guy. And I thought, not only is he old-fashioned in his view, he didn't even hear me. Right? He can't even see the opportunity because he can't hear me. And so, and I'm being a little long-winded, I apologize. At that point, I said, I got to do it myself. I'm a big company gal. I thought I'd take the idea to a big company, consult with them, we do it, they'd fund it. I'm like, I got to go out and do it myself. And so I have got, I think, the steepest learning curve of any business person at the age of 50 in the United States of America today. Because I've gone from analyst, running huge businesses, and now, the office I'm in, remember I told you all about those cookies in that plane? I've got mice in my office now. I am so packed in with the rest of the team that when I back my seat up, I bang into our lead designer every time. Every time. And it's all about learning to operate, forget about the office, but in a very different, very granular, very personal way, which is about the most exhilarating thing I can imagine.
So given your breakfast meeting, how do you plan to raise the money? Who do you think will?
I already did. I did. So we announced it this week. Mm-hmm. I went to, so it was really interesting. I went to 2, I don't want to say, I guess institutions. I did not, in this instance, go to any venture capitalist in the first instance. I went to individuals at companies who I know who I thought would get it. I had 2 conversations. One conversation, they were willing to invest in me at a, frankly, I took my breath away when they told me the valuation, but they wanted to have strategic control. And so I said no. So we went to another company that was willing to invest it at a much lower valuation, still not bad, if I do say so. That was willing to not have strategic control. So I was happy that I'd built the relationships and we were able to have those conversations. And then I reached out to individuals who I consider to be smart people about the issue, who do they don't do these investments as a living, but they do them. So Mohammed El Arian, who is former co-CEO of PIMCO, who I've known for years, who gets this. Ajay Banga, who's the CEO of MasterCard, who I've worked with, who gets this. Karen Feinerman, who's a hedge fund manager on CNBC Fast Money, who gets this. Andrea Young, who ran Avon, who gets it. And went to some group of them. The first part, talking to the companies about investing, was very easy. What was really interesting and sort of hard was talking to people who are my friends about investing. And it was only when I found my co-founder, and this may be very female, where I said, I don't know, what if I lose all their money? And he said, well, do you believe in this? I said, oh, all the way. And he said, well, then you're giving them an opportunity. You know, I thought, isn't that interesting at my age that I can still be coached on how to negotiate and how to reframe something like that. So we did it. If we lose their money, I'm going to be devastated.
So thinking about your career so far, best career decision you've ever made, worst career decision you've ever made? Kind of, as
yeah,
you look
it's
back.
a really great question. I think the best one would have to be becoming an equity research analyst, because it led to everything else, right? I still can't believe I got to run Smith Barney from running a research business, but had I not run it, it never would have happened. So that was a long time coming and super smart. The worst decision was clearly going to Bank of America to run Merrill Lynch. And the mistake I made there was that I said yes too quickly. So when that call came, I was on a career transition. I'll tell you the truth. I mean, I've had 3 career transitions now. The first one, young, baby at home, big insight, be a research analyst, successful. The third one, this one, transition to be an entrepreneur, I hope very successful. The second one, I'll tell you the truth, even though I networked and I had breakfast and I met with people and sort of was out there, the truth is I was just waiting for the phone to ring. I really was. I was just waiting for somebody to call me and rescue me. And he did, and he was Ken Lewis. And I was not critical enough in accepting that job. So, because I was so excited, right? I'm like, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. Just give it to me. And so when I asked him, for example, if I could meet members of the board, and he said, we don't do that, I said, okay. When I asked him to meet members of the management team who would be my peers, and he said, no, because they don't know about you coming in and we want to keep this quiet, I said, okay. When I asked for a contract that guaranteed my compensation, and they told me that the regulators wouldn't let them do that because we were in the downturn, I said, okay. When he told me that I had his word that I would be paid the amount they told me, I said, okay. So I said okay to all that stuff. And when he left, and we got to the end of the year, they did not pay me what they said they would pay me. They paid me about 70% of what they'd said. And the next year, because the company, and so he and I talked about that year's compensation, the next year's compensation. And so we go through the next year, the company made a loss, and they came back to me and said, not only are we not going to pay you what we said we'd pay you, which nobody remembered, because it was a conversation that I'd written down, but so be it. Not only did they not pay me what they said they're going to pay me, not only did they not pay me 70% of what they said they were going to pay me, because the company made a loss, they paid me 0. Right? And so you look at that and you say, that sort of sucked. And nobody needs to feel sorry. And then I was fired the next year. I think I lost money on the whole thing because because I'm such a loyal person, I bought stock going in that went down too. So I don't think I quite paid them to work there, but it wasn't far off. And when you look at why, I just wasn't willing to walk away from the job at all. Now that being said, when Sandy came to me, I negotiated the hell. I mean, I out-negotiated him on that compensation package with Sandy because I was just looser then, and I was just more willing to accept it. So I think the lesson is don't be so desperate and needy. That's a lesson.
Good lesson. So last question for me, and then we'll open it up. think about our audience at an early stage in their career, is there anything you'd like to share that you wish you'd known earlier in your career that you know now that might be relevant for this audience?
Yeah. There is, my belief at your stage was that hard work would always win out, and that there was a very strong relationship between working hard and success. And I'd say that is true most of the time. And you know, if you have one rule you want to follow, it's that. Because the truth, y'all are super smart. There are plenty of super smart people out there, right? And so it can be hard work. And that doesn't mean putting away creativity, because I find the harder I work, the more creative I become. But that hard work matters. That being said, sometimes it doesn't work. And it wasn't really until I was in my 40s that I recognized that sometimes life just gets in the way. And that we just need to sometimes give, you know, when we go into management roles, sometimes give ourselves a break. And you know, when I first recognized this was in a very little way. And I'm going to talk to the women in particular here about the women, you know, the women that I went to business school. Some of them fell off the career track, and I just sort of thought, wimp, right? Come on, work harder. But I started to notice as I had kids that the little things can add up. And so I had an insight. When I was CFO of Citi, I went with a group of my direct reports to Brazil. And we stayed up with clients, probably till 1:30 in the morning. And we were going to Argentina the next day. So we had to meet in the lobby at 5 a.m. Get home at 1:30, you meet at 5 a.m. And I remember sitting there at 5 a.m. and the 8 or 9 guys who I was with were all junior to me. They were all on my team. And they all came down, and there was lots of, I'm so tired, I woke up 15 minutes ago. And I'm like, 1 hour for this whole thing to get together, right? The hair, the makeup, and so on. And I thought, you know, this is crazy. And I started to do the math. And if you do the math, let's assume that you ladies out there, are much lower maintenance than I am, which is a pretty good assumption, okay? But let's assume you're lower maintenance. And your hair and makeup takes 15 minutes a day more than the guys do. 15 minutes a day, hour and 15 minutes a week, 5 hours a month, 60 hours a year. I kept doing this math. It's only 15 minutes a day. It's 60 hours a year. It's 1 work week a year. You got to be friggin' kidding me. That's before I shave my legs. It's before I have my brows done. This hair is not my natural color, okay? I recently even had the curls taken out. I mean, it's a lot to do to get it together. And so you start to say that, and you say that's every day, and that's a lot of time. Well, add on to that when you have the kids. And we women do, double the child care of the guys, 3 times the housework of the guys, wherever the research is now, but it's a lot more. And I could keep all that together working hard until my children got in trouble. And that's when I fell off, right? And my son gave his valedictorian speech at his high school. It was the last morning he's ever laid next to me in bed. And when he lay next to me in bed, I was scratching his back, and he said, "I don't feel good." And I realized he had a fever. Of course, I told him, "It's just nerves." "You're fine, you're fine. Get out there, kid, you're good." 1 week later, he was in the hospital with a bleeding spleen and a liver that was having trouble functioning, right? There's nobody who can work through that. A year later, the phone rings. I'm in the kitchen. It's my daughter on the phone, and her first words are, "I'm okay, Mom." And I said, "Good, I'm glad you're okay. Why?" And she said, "I was in a car accident." Turns out she wasn't okay, and she was out of school for 6 months, recovering because she'd hit her head. These things happen. You will be leaders. By definition, you all are leaders, and you will be leaders. And for those of you, as you move into leadership positions, to recognize that we've all got lives. And the fact that our lives come into the work life does not mean we're weak, doesn't mean we're not committed. It means we're people. And that to give each other that flex in that room really matters. In business today, we have flexibility, but I don't think we yet have flexibility without shame. And so as you come in as leaders into the junior levels, beginning to have these conversations, and as you become senior, beginning to have this flex in your organization, I promise you one thing, it will pay off in better results. Because a happy workforce and a workforce where you don't have to think, worry about the kid at home, but you can be home when you're home and work when you're work and bring your full self to work, the research is very clear, is a much more successful organization. But corporate America isn't there yet, and all of you are going to be leaders who can make a change.
On that note, let's open it up to the group for your questions. I think we have a microphone here. If you could use the microphone, that would really be helpful. Any questions that you'd like Sallie to answer for you out there? This brave gentleman up here.
Hi, I'm Robert. How would you compare your experiences as an analyst and as an entrepreneur? Did you like one better? Or?
Yeah, I love it all. There is some similarity to them, interestingly enough, because they're both, you got to get yourself up and you got to get yourself going. As your research analyst, there was nobody who was standing over me saying, you need to put out this piece of research on this day in this way, at all. And so there was a sense of, I've got to self-start, I've got to figure it out, and I have to drive my own business. Same with an entrepreneur, right? If you don't do anything, nothing happens. The difference, though, is that you were getting a paycheck as a research analyst, right? You had a salary that was coming in. The terrifying thing about an entrepreneur is the cash. It's just the, geez Louise, are we going to run out of cash? And it will give you an ulcer. I mean, it is really the most terrifying. I was telling the group before, I slept through the financial crisis. Okay, I would go home at night and I would go to sleep, and when the alarm clock went off, I would wake up. As an entrepreneur, and it hasn't happened in a bit, it may happen soon, 3:30 in the morning, wide awake. And the other thing is that, which I'm sort of implying, is that sense of personal responsibility. A great thing about working, as a junior vice president in charge of widgets, there are a lot of people to blame if you fail. There are a lot of other people whose fault it can be. There are a lot of people to catch you if you've got your flat sides. And if you fail internally, maybe you don't have to tell everybody externally. As a research analyst, when you were wrong, everybody, not that many people cared, but it was out there for the world to see. As an entrepreneur, if you fail, it's yours, right? And so you have to be sure you're ready for that kind of personal responsibility. Now, the good news is nobody cares as much as you do if you fail. Nobody, right? Nobody's watching you as intensely as you think they are, but it's a sense of definite personal ownership.
Hey, I'm Zaskia. Thanks for sharing all these honest insights first. And I have a question. What do you think, how female can a woman be when starting the career?
How what?
How female can a woman be when she's starting her career? Or did you try to appear male and not that female?
It's probably a good question. I'm not quite sure.
You spend an hour a day on hair and makeup.
It's pretty female. It's pretty female.
Note that, yeah.
It's pretty female, and I was pregnant at work as well. I never, I had places I worked at where I could fully be myself, and I was more successful at them. And whether that meant I was more female or not, but I was more Sallie. I remember calling my dad, or on the phone with my dad when I was running Smith Barney. And City has a reputation, and certainly did then, Sandy while I was running, as a pretty tough place. But I remember saying to my dad that I just felt like I was me. I wasn't not saying something. I just felt like I was 100% me. Whereas at Bank of America, again, being candid, very quickly, I just didn't speak the language very well. And so I'd say something, and people would look at me like I'd let a stink bomb off. and I'd sort of listen to other people to try to figure out what I was supposed to say. So I don't know if one of those is more female or not. And and I talked to my colleagues, and I'd say, "Do you feel what I'm feeling here?" And they say, "No, this is great. It's all about, I feel like I can be myself." And so I think some of it is about finding that culture that you feel most comfortable in, because you're more successful if you're more comfortable, right? And culture is challenging because it's so intangible. And how do you get a read of it? There are more ways to today than when I was your age, because you have all those anonymous sites you can go to, and you can figure out who the alumni are here, who used to work at a company or work at a company. You can sort of get the read in different ways. But for me, it's not female or not, it's yourself or not as to which you can be. And again, it's one of the reasons I liked being a research analyst, because there were just more degrees of freedom. You could be successful in different ways. You didn't have to, back in the day, if you worked at IBM, you had to wear the white shirt and the blue suit and the blue tie. As a research analyst, there were just those more degrees of freedom.
I think there's a question up here.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I remember when it first came out on Fast Company and stuff, so it's really inspirational.
Thank you.
I had a question. As a successful female leader, what do you think are the real issues about getting representation of women in leadership roles? What do you think is the real systematic reason, given that there is sometimes adequate representation in the junior ranks, but it doesn't translate to senior leadership roles?
It ain't a pipeline issue. It ain't a pipeline issue. I had the New York Times call me last year and said, "Great news, Sallie. The investment banking analyst class this year is a third female." And I said, "Fantastic. In 1987, when I started, my class was a third female." It ain't a pipeline issue, but it's a very complex issue. It's very complicated. And there are, subtle gender issues that come to play into it. There are the fact that the workforce today, or many companies today, are really still geared, even if they have no gender discrimination issues on the surface, so many of these places are still really geared to being a sole breadwinner in a traditional home, right? So one of the things we recently, I actually do an interesting thing where I poll the women at the Ellevate Network every week, every single week. And every single week we get feedback from them, and it's tens of thousands of them we ask the questions to. We get hundreds of replies. And when we asked them if gender discrimination still existed at their companies, I'm going to get the number off, but not by much. Something like 96% of women said it did. Now, 85% said it was subtle, right? And the rest said it was overt. So there's definitely still that issue. We then polled them a few weeks ago and asked them about, these new perks that are being given of nannies flying with you on trips and eggs being frozen and so on, and said, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And the women overwhelmingly said it was actually bad. That what it did was it perpetuated the always-on culture. That now, what excuse do you have to bring your nanny? Right? Now, why wouldn't you work hard? You can freeze your eggs. Now, I don't really know if I agree with it or not. I haven't given it an enormous amount of thought, but I can tell you that's what came back from them. And so what we see women doing, and one of the reasons I'm optimistic, more optimistic than I've ever been, is because there was a penalty for companies that didn't do it right before, but it was a theoretical penalty. I've talked a lot, right? Companies with diverse leadership teams have higher returns on equity and greater client focus and greater innovation and higher returns on sales, and by many research, better stock price performance. But the truth is, when you're in that room and you're making a decision about who to promote, if I put Bill in versus Susie, my ROE will decline 2%. That's not happening anywhere on the planet, right? And so there was no very visible penalty. What's happening now is, one, there's more information. And so I'm hearing more and more people, women, people, who are saying, this company's culture just doesn't fit me. It's an itchy sweater. It's always on. I'm not going to be always on. I want something different. Its mission and purpose does not align with mine. I want something different. I'm going. And now I know more that I can go from company A to company B. And by the way, if my whole industry doesn't work for me, or company A and company B, the other choice before was I'm going home. Today, with the price of technology coming down, we're in a golden age of entrepreneurialism. We're in a golden age of female entrepreneurialism. I cannot tell you how many women I'm talking to who are saying that company wasn't right for me, I'm starting my own. And it's interesting because when you ask men why they start companies, they typically say to make money, which is super. When you ask women, they say to make money, but they say it's also because I want to build the company at which I want to work, right? And so some of this stuff just ain't going to change, but we're going to see a shifting of talent that's going to flower over here in a way that just wasn't possible before. Over here.
Hi, again, thank you for your time. So going off that, because of your gender, have you ever faced any sort of like discrimination at work, and how, if so, did you deal with that?
I'm sorry, what's that? Discrimination?
Did you face,
Yeah.
have you ever faced any discrimination at work, and if so, how did you deal with it?
You know, it's interesting. So let's keep in mind, I started in the 80s, and when I started at Solomon Brothers in the investment banking program in the 80s, when I would walk in the morning, there was a Xerox copy of a penis on my desk most days. You know, you'd pick it up, you'd crumple it, you'd throw it away, and you'd use the Xerox machine on a different floor, obviously. I don't believe that occurs anymore. I don't believe it occurs anymore. I've sort of contemplated the question of when I was invited to leave at Citi, was I invited to leave because I was a woman? And the answer I had for years and years and years was absolutely not. It was a business disagreement. And I was telling the group before, the answer's changed now, which is if I sort of replace emotion with facts, all I could think about was the relationship with the clients, and all I talked about was the long-term impact. It was long-term impact and clients, right? The research tells me those are very female. That we accidentally lost all of Mr. Smith's money is a very female thing. And so I was definitely fired because of the disagreement. And so I've sort of shifted my answer now. Was I fired because I was a woman? Not exactly, but yes, in fact, that was the case. So there are different shades of gray on this issue. But look, the truth is, again, it is what it is, right? That's in the past. What can we do about it going forward? One of the things that I've talked about is talking about it, naming it, right? Calling it out. Not in an obnoxious way, in front of everybody and get upset, but in a, very fact-based, this is what just happened, this is what I observed, this feels like a gender issue to me, and we're not having nearly enough of what I call those courageous conversations at work because they can be enormously effective.
Final question. We have time for one more. If there's one more, that in
One
the
in the back.
back, right there. Last question to you.
Hi, Sallie. I'm Erin. You talked about your kids, your family. Talk about, women nowadays have nannies on planes, etc. And not even just specific to females, but to anybody who wants to be successful in their career, but also does have a life at home. What advice do you have, or how have you given your life, your work-life balance, and also have so much success?
I don't know that I really know what work-life balance is. And a little bit, as we talked about earlier, success and failure are these amorphous things, they're points in time, right? I'm successful, tomorrow I fail. That balance changes. When I was chief financial officer of Citigroup, the week before we reported earnings, that was it. I mean, there were no school plays, nothing. That was what I was doing, and my husband had to adjust his calendar so that we could be sort of a whole family there. And so it shifted. It shifted minute to minute, day to day, year to year. I was telling somebody earlier today, my husband's in his 60s. He's working like a 25-year-old. It's the damnedest thing I've ever seen. I mean, he was part-time for a while, and he's got this renewed energy for his career. And so, you know, I think we find that way. But one thing I'm going to tell you, we're a little more mature. Couple things. It goes by fast. What do they say? The days are long and the years are short. Mm-hmm. It goes by fast, so you better have fun. And the other thing is, shit happens. And I don't know why, when you were asking the question, I thought about something I don't talk about, and I really don't often think about it. But right after, a woman who I hired at Sanford Bernstein to be a research analyst, she's covering maybe it was international foods. And she was so all about her job. I mean, all about her job. And wanted to be successful and, you know, grabbed the brass ring and so on. She had a baby. She's all about her job. And I got to tell you, the truth is, the harder she worked, the more mediocre she was. I mean, she really just, you know, she wasn't one of those stars, but golly Moses, she put in the hours. And one morning, she was on her way to work. She stepped off the curb and she was hit by a truck and she was killed. And I sat in her funeral and watched her husband hold their gurgling, laughing, smiling, bald 10-month-old daughter. And I remember turning to the woman who was my associate director of research, who's still a good friend of mine, and said, well, that was a complete waste. You know, that this woman spent those years after that brass ring that she really wasn't even going to achieve, and she got killed. And so what I want to warn y'all about is shit happens, right? And you never know when it's going to happen. And so if you put your whole soul into business, at some point you will regret it. Now, I had this wonderful instance. Again, I haven't talked about this either. So when I was at Citi, I was on the corporate jet, and we were flying between Moscow and Istanbul. And we just finished breakfast. And I went to the back of the plane to get some work done. And all of a sudden, the stewardess comes running towards the back of the plane and opens up the little chest and starts pulling out the blankets. And I'm like, somebody's got to go to sleep that badly? And I look up, and the cabin is filled with smoke. I mean, absolutely filled with smoke. And you know, those corporate jets, you get up 45,000 feet, right? And you can smell it. And I look up and I see the pilot with the mask on his face, which I did not begrudge him, I have to tell you, with the oxygen. And all of us are up, and everybody, and it's coming through the friggin' vents. And I'm like, son of a gun, we're going down. Because it's in the belly of the plane. It's coming through the vents. And we couldn't find it. And I remember sitting there, and I stopped, and I thought to myself, what are my life regrets right now? And I thought, I don't have any. Score. We found the smoke. It was actually behind the microwave, but was getting sucked in through the vents. We stopped it. We taped it up. We continued on. I've never been so happy to see a city as I was. Istanbul is still my favorite city because of that. But, you know, I've never talked about this, but maybe it's worth every once in a while having a moment to check in with yourself and saying, if today were the day, because it can be any day, would I be okay with this, right? Because you're going to be successful in business. There's no doubt about it. Your goal is to be successful in business and to be successful in life, too.
Well, on that note, being successful in business and being successful in life, let's thank Sallie for joining us, sharing her insights. Thank you for being here.
I haven't thought about that plane story in a long time.